Welcome to our Commissioner Status Update. Today is Monday, March 23rd, 2020. The time is 11:02 a.m. I am calling this meeting to order. Attending in person are Commissioners Duncan and Filios. Commissioner Bill Brooks is joining us by phone. Do we have any changes to the agenda? Hearing none, but I am going to reorder it as we're waiting for a functioning laptop to be able to for Dr. Mills to be able to make his presentation. So the other two items should be relatively brief. So I'm going to begin with item number 2, Kootenai County Sheriff's Office Marine Building. Leslie.
I'll have Sean take a crack at this one.
Okay.
Sean?
Sean Riley, for the record. A couple months ago, we opened bids and awarded a bid to General Construction in the amount of $98,800 for the Marine Pole Barn building. Since that bid was awarded, there was another almost $9,000 added for a dog kennel, and then there was another change order that was not approved last week for another $23,000 for heating and a different kind of insulation, because once you heat the building, pardon me, then you have to change the way it's insulated for code. So that takes this project approximately $32,000 over what it was already bid at. So in having conversations with legal, there is some language in the contract that allows the county to get out of this job. And I believe that has to be done at the business meeting. I've talked to the sheriff's office. They would like to step back as well and regroup. It just never got bid correctly. There was no geo work done on the soil. So now the contractor sends me another email. We can't get the gas out of the building that we were going to get it out of. So now it's going to cost you money to get the gas line off of Dalton. And I don't know how much soil, but I got to haul all this dirt off. That's probably another 30 grand right there. So it's best, I think, and in talking to Lieutenant Higgins, we have actually a better location for the building, because putting the building where it was like trying to cram 10 pounds of beans in a 5-gallon bucket. It just wasn't going to work. So that's where we're at.
Okay. So basically on hold.
Well,
No.
Or you're just killing it?
Pulling it back.
We're going to pull it back.
I'd like to bring something to the business meeting to ask you to invoke the language in the contract, and then we can serve notice to Gino that we're stepping away. We're not out any money. I put a stop work on them immediately. I copied legal on the email.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you.
And do you think Gino will rebid once it goes forward?
Yeah, I'm sure they will.
Okay. And Captain Street, do you have anything to add?
Just that from the sheriff's office perspective, we're
On board?
Okay, so you're in agreement.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's wise to put a stop to this project and then regroup and put it out to bid again.
Okay.
Sergeant, anything to add?
No, I agree with Captain Street, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, good enough. The second item, budgeting for fleet management. Bill?
Yeah, we've got, we talked about this with Kim Riley. She had some ideas that, is she in the meeting?
Yes, Kim is here.
Okay, could you ask her to talk about that?
Okay, yeah, Bill, you'll have to speak up. We're trying to pick it up on on the audio. Okay. Kim, do you have anything to add on this?
You asked, yeah.
Go right ahead.
Dina sent the information out. We had a fleet management meeting on February 20, and during that meeting, the conversation of where expenses would be budgeted if we had a transfer that was going to take ownership from another department. The conversation was the person that's getting rid of the vehicle isn't budgeted for it. The person that's going to take ownership of the vehicle or take over the use of that vehicle hasn't budgeted for it either. And so something we were going to bring forward in our proposal when we're getting ready for budget was this situation, and then we actually had a case where it transpired. So we thought it would be a good idea to come before you with our thoughts here. We've spoken with Dina in regard to the budget, and it just seems to make sense to put all of these expenses in one place so that we can track true fleet expenses moving forward. So using the general fund, where at the end of the year, budgets end up balancing there anyway, setting up a maintenance line item for these types of transactions, and then possibly even through the budget cycle, putting a capital line item there as well. So the general governmental vehicles would be funded by the BOCC, and then you would also determine which department, if any, those vehicles would be assigned to, or if it would maybe be a pool vehicle. So this is just looking forward into the FY21 budget cycle, and then possibly for this transaction as well, if you support the idea.
Okay. Thoughts? Leslie, Bill?
What's the downside?
I don't think there is one. The expenses now are being booked to individual department budgets. If we're looking at a governmental fleet, it kind of makes sense to put it all in one spot so that we can track what's true fleet expenses and what is just ongoing maintenance of, vehicles that people already have in their departments.
So departments would still be responsible for whatever vehicles are assigned to them, doing the maintenance on those. So that wouldn't change.
That's my understanding. I mean, maybe down the road, this is still an early, we're still in the early stages of moving forward with the fleet management. I think there's a lot of questions, but this is one thing where if we're going to have the trickle down, it is going to happen on a regular basis, and nobody is really planning for that expense. We don't know how much it's going to cost to make sure a vehicle's in good working condition before it gets moved on to the next department.
Okay.
And it may be when the sheriff's office, when they look at it, they may determine it's not best to transfer the vehicle. It might be best to surplus it. And then looking on down the road, if we surplus vehicles that are truly needing to be surplus, it would probably fund a lot of our expenses, even the capital on the onset.
Fair enough. Makes sense. Dina?
It just provides a sustainable, rational place, especially for the government-based, not sheriff or government-based vehicles. You have, you're selling off vehicles, and we have a list of vehicles that look like they need to be surplus. You can take that money and set it in a pot in the BOCC, and then if you're transferring a vehicle, say from Parks and Waterways to Buildings and Grounds, you have some funding there in the budget to go get it tuned up, get new tires, get it all ready to go, so when it's handed off, it's serviceable and ready to use.
Okay.
So we'd like to set that up for the budget for 2020.
Makes sense.
Okay. I think it's something that we should definitely look into, not understanding what downside that maybe we're not seeing yet.
We might want to earmark like $5,000-$10,000 just in the budget as a line item, just to have it there for maintenance and transitioning vehicles, and just run all of the revenues and expenses through that area, and then we can quantify how our fleet management.
Understood. And so you're thinking for fiscal '21? Okay, makes good sense.
There is already a line item that they have budgeted for the revenue coming in from the auctions, and I think last year it was over $50,000 that came in.
Which would pay for 2 new,
Exactly. So that side's
escapes.
already there.
Okay.
And if we really are proactive in getting rid of when we ran our list, there were multiple vehicles that were used less than 250 miles in the year.
Wow.
So if we start looking at the vehicles, why aren't they being used because they're not reliable? But that revenue would then come in, and I think it would come close probably to offsetting. if
Okay.
we plan that way.
So could we have a separate budget meeting then with this whole proposal? And with maybe 3 to 5 years on that revenue line?
Yeah, we were waiting for, we had sent out the request for what departments thought they might need in FY21. That's been taken into consideration here. We were going to wait for them to get all of their budget requests in and then regroup.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so then we'll take it up as part of the fiscal '21 budget. Okay. Bill, you okay?
Yeah, I think Kim did a together with help from Dina. And I think it sounds like a very worthwhile line of thought to explore.
Okay. Sean, did you want to add something?
Yeah, this happened to my department about 4 or 5 years ago. I got a Toyota from the assessor that was being used, and it had a lot of miles on it. It was this county timber assessor. So, you know, he's driving all. So anyway, long story short, I get this truck. I have a maintenance, automotive maintenance budget of $5,000. I don't have the truck a week, and it's $2,250, $2,250 for me to put a new tranny in it.
Okay,
You know, I wasn't budgeted for that. There goes half my, so, you know, I think it's a great idea. That's
Okay,
what
good.
it says.
okay,
Super.
thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on here. Before we turn over to Dr. Mills, what I'm going to do is, we've got a few folks who are joining us, I guess, who are watching this as a live stream. So I'm going to call out the organization, and if you wouldn't mind, just identify yourself. EMS? Sandy? I guess she's not on. KCSO? They might have, who was the other one we had? EMS,
Did you want them to
OEM?
call in? Did you want them to call in?
Yeah, they were supposed to, well, no, they're watching it, oh, that's right, they
Oh.
would have had to call in.
Yeah. 'cause
Okay,
we
so
can't
you
hear from
guys-
them if they're watching.
Okay, so what's the conference number? Okay, if you're watching on,
205.
okay, here's the conference call number, if you're watching by live stream, 205-825-9699. This way, if you want to make any contribution to the discussion, you're welcome to do so. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go around the room very briefly for Dr. Mills' benefit. Let me start with Greg. Please name and organization, function.
Building and Ground. Pat Breeden, Prosecutor's Office, Civil Division.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, Coeur d'Alene Press.
Michelle?
Michelle, Auditor.
Sean?
Sean Riley, consultant.
Penny, jump in. Okay. Dave?
Dave Ferguson, Prosecutor's Office.
Dina Darrow, Auditor's Office.
Kim Riley, Resource Management Office.
Okay, and then we have our clerk, we have Tina, and then Nancy Jones, who is handling our live stream. So without any further ado, and on the camera is Dwayne Rasmussen. Some of you know Dwayne. Dr. Mills, take it away, sir.
First of all, I want to thank you, Commissioners Duncan, Brooks, and Filios, for having the interest to invite me here and to share with you, hopefully, some basic medical and epidemiologic information I can give you to give you a framework in which to make your very important decisions.
They're just dialing in, hold on. Okay, so we have Panhandle Health, OEM, Sheriff's.
So without any further ado, and on the camera is Dwayne Rasmussen. Some of you know Dwayne.
Why is it repeating? Oh, because it was picked it up. Okay, go right ahead, I'm
If you're
sorry.
on the call, can you mute the
Yes,
sound,
please.
I want to
Go right ahead, sir.
Thank you. So, basically, my talk will be in essentially two parts here. The first part will be just some very basic things. That's a little nerdy. It will not predominate, but it's just a little basic information I would like for you to have as a backdrop to where we move into more of the part that will help you in your decision-making as time goes on. So the very first thing I want to do is just take a couple of moments to help folks remember their high school biology, the difference between a bacteria and a virus. And first of all, it's the size, bacteria a lot larger, viruses are much smaller. And jumping on down there, the infection with bacteria is usually localized, and with viruses, it's systemic. But the infection with bacteria can become generalized if it gets into the bloodstream. The important thing, the biggest difference, of course, between bacteria and viruses are that bacteria are living organisms and they can reproduce themselves. However, viruses are parasites, and they have to invade your cell, let either their RNA or their DNA fuse with your genetic material to start replicating themselves. And so the organism, of course, we're talking about today is the coronavirus, and that's the way it works, and that's the way it reproduces itself. The duration of the illness can be a week to 10 days. And jumping on down, the bacteria are visible under a light microscope. The viruses are not. It requires an electron microscope. Treatment, bacteria respond to antibiotics, but viruses do not. The antibiotics block some, very important life-sustaining things for bacteria, whereas the antibiotics have no effect on viruses at all. So the virus that we're talking about today, and I want to help clarify the difference between the name of the virus and the disease that causes it. The virus is called the SARS-CoV-2 virus, but it causes the disease of COVID-19. So that's the difference when you see these two things in the literature, either the media or the medical literature. That's the differentiation. The virus is the SARS-CoV-2 and the disease is COVID-19. The SARS-CoV-2 virus is a beta coronavirus. There are 4 families of coronavirus, and the SARS-CoV-2 virus is a kissing cousin of the previous SARS and MERS that you're both familiar with. As you know, this all started at a meat market in Wuhan and has spread from there, so we won't go into any further detail on that. Now, I want to point out that this particular virus binds to the acetylcholine 2 receptor in the body, and this is the same receptor that is involved in the regulation of blood pressure. And so many people who have hypertension take medications that block this receptor, and maybe you've heard your doc say, hey, we're going to put you on an ACE inhibitor, and that's what most lay people know it as, is, oh, I take either a beta blocker or an ACE inhibitor. But the virus binds to that very same receptor that if you take that medication, the ACE inhibitor binds to. And so I'm pointing this out because epidemiologically, they discovered that in Italy, up to 75% of some of the deaths of the folks all had hypertension. And so the speculation is that people who take ACE inhibitors and it blocks that receptor have more, that there's a stimulation and they have more of these receptors on their cells, and so the virus is more deadly because it has more receptors that are available to it. The last thing I would point out on this slide is that viruses can be one of 2 types of genetic material. They can be RNA or DNA. The thing that's important here, and the thing that will impact you, is that this virus is an RNA virus, and the RNA viruses are inherently more unstable and they mutate a lot more. So what does this have to do with you? This has to do with the fact that my concern is we are all hoping for a successful vaccine that is going to come on the market. And I'm sure we've probably heard Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, say many times, we are not going to have an effective vaccine for the next 1 to 2 years. So, to my point, even if we get a vaccine, this is my concern. It's a highly unstable virus. It takes a year to develop the vaccine. By the time the vaccine gets to market, it may not be effective, and we have that same problem every season with influenza. Some estimates are that influenza vaccine is only perhaps 50% effective, as good as a flip of a coin. So for people who are putting their hopes in this to end the epidemic, this is going to be a consideration and a concern. Okay. The rest of the time, I want to pretty much spend in talking about the epidemiology of this disease, because this is what affects what you need to know and affects your decision-making process as you have to think about what businesses you're going to close down, how much you're going to enforce, and how you're going to enforce the directives that are going to come out of the Department of Health.
Dr.
Greg?
Mills, if I could ask you to sidestep, tell us a little bit about your background, your bio, if you would, please.
The background.
Your
what?
background, yeah.
Oh, my background, yes. I apologize. I should do that. And, Commissioner Filius is pointing out a good thing, that whenever you read a book or you read an article or you listen to someone speak, it's always good to know what their bias and their perspective is, because we all have it, no matter how objective we think we are. My bias and my perspective is preventive medicine. I spent 27 years in the practice of emergency medicine, the last 11 of those years teaching emergency medicine in 3 medical schools, and the last of those was Vanderbilt University. As I practiced emergency medicine for 27 years, I was completely impressed as to how much of what I was taking care of, the motorcycle head injury cases we were shoveling off the helicopters, the heart attacks that were coming in, how the majority of that was preventive. So after 27 years of that, I resigned my faculty position at Vanderbilt, went up to the University of Michigan and did a second specialty residency in occupational environmental medicine, and became certified under the American Board of Preventive Medicine with the subspecialties in occupational environmental medicine. After doing that, one of the most interesting jobs I had for a period of time, I was a Director of Clinical Operations at the Hanford Nuclear Site down in southeastern Washington. Most of you know that as the world's largest hazardous waste site and also one of the Manhattan Projects. We were also the site that purified the uranium for the bomb that was dropped over Nagasaki. So anyhow, my education and training in biostatistics and epidemiology are that at the level of someone who has a master's degree. I obtained a master's degree in public health while I was there at the University of Michigan. So that is, in a nutshell, my background, my experience, and my perspective.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So first of all, epidemiology is the study of disease patterns in different populations. Now, to an epidemiologist, a population can be any subgrouping of people that share a common characteristic. To an epidemiologist who's setting out to look at disease patterns, it might be in all men. It might be in all men between the ages of 50 and 60, and they'll be looking at usually a specific disease. And as I have my example up there, it could be, all Oriental females between the ages of 20, 30. That's a population to an epidemiologist. So when we look at disease occurrence, and we are interested, of course, in the population of Kootenai County. So our population isn't the state of Idaho or the United States. It's the 157,000 people that live in Kootenai County. Now, we don't have epidemiologic numbers yet because we're so early in this for our county. We are starting to develop some numbers nationwide and worldwide, but those numbers are very inaccurate. But before I get to that, one of the most important things that we are concerned about in a pandemic or an epidemic is the case fatality rate of the infection that we're struggling with. And so I have up here on the slide that is the number of people who die divided by the number of people who have the disease. In this case, the number of people who have the infection. So what is the case fatality rate for COVID-19? Well, the medical literature is giving numbers around 2 to 4% for the general population, but you can't look at just the general population because the disease disproportionately hits the older populations, the people 60 and above in particular, or people especially who have comorbidities like hypertension, diabetes, any immunosuppressive condition or so forth. So on the right there, this is going to be the crux of what I'm going to keep coming back to over and over again in this talk. The problem we have right now is that we know how many people are dying because people don't usually hang out in their cabin up here in Kootenai National Forest and just die. If they start getting sick enough, they come into the hospital, they die in the hospital, it's reported. So our data on the number of deaths is pretty good, it's pretty solid. But the big problem is the triple question marks there, the numerator. We have no clue how many people out there are actually infected and are walking around carrying the virus. Now, the case fatality numbers that we've been given is the number of people who have died over the confirmed cases. But you can immediately appreciate that that is not a valid number because we have no clue how many people are out there that actually have it because they haven't been tested. We can't test 100% of the population. And even if we wanted to, we have had an extreme shortage of tests to even do this. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So I'm going to hit on this idea here of the fact that you as county commissioners are going to be called to make decisions on a lack of data. One of the most important pieces of data you need to know is how many people walking around out there just have a few aches and a few, maybe a little sore throat, or they have mild cough, and they don't even know they have the coronavirus. So, having said that, before I move on, I also happen to hold a faculty position at the Elliott Floyd College of Medicine at Washington State University in Spokane, and I am meeting by teleconference tomorrow the Vice Dean for Research and one of his colleagues, and these folks are biostatisticians, and I am proposing a study to answer this very question. I am going to, by epidemiologic methods, try to get, by sampling, and then infer from sampling to the general population, what is the estimated number of people who actually are sick out there, and we're not ever going to know because they're not going to even come in and seek medical attention. But there's a method to do that, and I'm not going to get into that. But I do want you to know that this is an area of interest of mine, and I would like to include Northern Idaho in that study if I could. Now, the biggest challenges are going to be funding. That's always a challenge. A lot of the funding for research from NIH and so forth has dried up over the years. But in my initial conversation with the dean, we may be looking at foundations to be able to fund the study. Any question on that before I move? Because that's one of the most important things we're struggling with.
Any questions, anyone? No? Keep going.
What did I do here? Okay.
There you go.
Very quickly, SARS came in 2002. It had low infectivity. So it was less what we call pathogenic. You don't get as infected as easily with it, but it had a higher fatality rate than the current coronavirus. MERS was even worse yet. MERS has a fatality rate of around 30%. But again, these pandemics, if they became that, are much easier to contain because of that lower infectivity I put up there. So it's harder to get infected if you're exposed to it, but if you get it, it's worse. That's the problem with SARS-CoV-2. SARS-CoV-2 is highly pathogenic. You get it easily, but it has a much lower fatality rate, of course, except in the elderly population. So that's what we're struggling with in this pandemic. We're struggling with folks who have just mild symptoms, and it doesn't kill them, but it can kill a considerable proportion of the older population. Now, I just want to make a comment about this thing with the older population. When I hear discussions, I even read in the literature, look, guys, don't worry, this does not kill 95% of the population. You know, you've heard that, you've seen it, and you know, the people that do really get sick are just the old people, or the old people with, well, I qualify as one of those old people. I'm over 70 years old. I don't have any particular comorbid conditions. But life is still pretty important to us. I still work out at Peak 3 times a week. Well, not anymore. They closed it this last week. We have grandchildren, and we have children, and we want to be productive and carry on with their lives. So just as a personal observation, I would throw that in when I hear, well, don't worry, this disease, 95% of the people don't really get sick, and so on and so forth, just the old people. I want to remind the millennials that you'll be there sooner before they know it. The incubation, well, first of all, this virus, incidentally, the CoV-2 virus, shares 80% of its genetic sequence with the SARS virus. So it's very similar, but clinically it's very different. The incubation period, nobody really knows. If a virus falls on your skin, no, forget the skin. You get it through your airways. If the virus falls in your mouth or in your nose, no one has a clue when that happens. So the only way we have to estimate incubation are when people come in, they have the disease, we say, when was the last time you had contact with someone else that had this disease? That's the way we're estimating incubation. It's thought to be around 5 days on average, but 95% confidence intervals, and this is a more realistic statistic. It simply means that if you sample a population over and over again, 95% of those samples will contain the true mean. So the 95% confidence is between 4 to 7 days, but CDC and some of the others say, yeah, but it really goes up to 14 days. But I would add, there's also a few cases in the literature where it actually goes up to 24 days. But most people accept up to the average being around 5 days, up to 2 weeks. And so that's why CDC uses 2 weeks when they put people in quarantine and so forth. Now, I'm coming to the most important point, and we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about this last point here. The initial studies from China revealed that what we call the reproductive number was 2.68. What is the reproductive number? Let's see if I have a slide on that. I thought I did. I think I do, but it's further down. But simply put, the reproductive number are the number of people who will become infected from a contagious person. So if I go out there, if I have COVID-19 and I go out there, on average, I'm going to infect 2 more people. And so this has brings about serious complexity in trying to contain this disease. And we'll get to that in just a minute. The other problem, of course, we're struggling with is, and this is a study that was published in the New England Journal 3 or 4 weeks ago from China, and they looked at the viral loads of people, and they actually measured the level of viruses in their, I think it was in their nasal passages and in their throat. They found that the viruses had a much higher count in the nose than in the throat, so that's why when we do testing, we usually like to get a nasal swab if we can, but you can take it from the throat. But that last point is the most important one, that they actually had an asymptomatic patient that had the exact same number of viral load as the people who were completely sick. So this study demonstrated that people who are totally asymptomatic will have enough viral load to go ahead and spread the disease. Let's step back for a minute and talk about testing, and then we'll continue with the epidemiologic saga. How do we identify the virus? This is not done by cultures like we usually do with bacteria and so forth. The virus is identified by a test, and supposedly this test can detect 1 DNA strand, theoretically, but this test, the way it works is we take the swab, and if there's supposedly just 1 DNA strand in there, we mix it in with some other genetic material that have the starting sequence, the gene sequence, for what's in the virus, and then it has all the raw material, the other 4 components of DNA mixed in. And if the virus is present, if the DNA is present or the RNA, it'll recognize this beginning sequence, this little piece of genetic material. It's not the whole gene or the whole chromosome, it's just a piece. If it recognizes it, it'll start replicating just like it does when it gets inside your cell. I mean, it's a parasite. That's what it does. It replicates itself. And so what I want to show you is that the way it goes from one strand of DNA to something that's large enough so we can detect it and say, you've got coronavirus, is that each time it doubles itself. So one strand, when it replicates itself, goes to 2, 2 goes to 4, 4 goes to 8, 8 to 16, and it goes up exponentially like that. So after 30 of these cycles, and the machine cycles so many times, you've got over 1 million DNA particles, and then it's large enough to measure and to do your research with. So this test is what we call it's a chain reaction type test. It's the P stands for polymerase. Polymerase is the enzyme that helps the DNA replicate itself. So it's not a culture, and it detects things by simply finding one little strand and then replicating itself till we have enough of the particles to be able to detect it. Now, this is where we ran into a problem here in the United States and why we're behind the 8 ball. We had technical challenges with the first tests that were developed by the CDC. At first, they limited to where these tests could be sent, and if it's my correct understanding, I think they all had to go through Atlanta, through their lab there. But then they loosened it up and said, well, you can go to some of the regional labs. So that was one problem. We had technical problems. We didn't have enough of the tests, and they limited the testing to just people who had a known contact or came from Wuhan, China. And that became what they called person under investigation, a PUI. Well, on February 29, just 3 weeks ago, the FDA finally expanded the testing capacity by eliminating this requirement that the labs had to get advanced clearance from the FDA before using their own laboratory-developed tests. And then on March 3, President Pence announced the removal of all federal limits on testing, and that the doctors could use their own clinical judgment as to who they thought needed a test. So the bottom line is that we're way behind on the testing. And I apologize, I keep hitting the wrong button here. I just want to quickly throw this in. This isn't epidemiology here, but this is going to come in your last slide in your decision-making process. Currently, the medical management of this disease is completely supportive. We do not have any specific treatments. We don't have a vaccine. There are 11 vaccines that are currently in development. CDC started a phase 1 study for mRNA vaccine this month. Phase 1, you have 4 phases in a clinical study. Phase 1 simply establishes the fact that, yeah, this is safe. We can administer it to a human being. And they might start with animal studies and so forth. And the first humans have now received the vaccine that's being developed by NIH this month. There are no antiviral medications that are really approved for treatment at this time. There were some trials going on. One of these trials I was referring to was in China. They used 2 antiviral medications. I believe they were originally for the treatment of HIV. Unfortunately, the New England Journal of Medicine just came out this week and said they weren't effective. The treated people didn't do any better in the control group. Other medications that are under consideration are these antiviral medications. The only one I'm going to talk about is chloroquine, because you probably heard about it on the news. Interestingly enough, President Trump sees this as something that's going to reset everything for us, in this pandemic. Unfortunately, Director Fauci from the National Institute of Health was there with him, said, well, what we're looking at chloroquine came from a small study that was not a randomized trial. It was anecdotal. And then, interestingly enough, our president came back though and said, well, he thought this was, in so many words, this is the answer, and the FDA is going to forge ahead and do a study. Now, I will say, in our president's, behalf, that I'm not sure there is actually, I came across 2 studies on hydrochloroquine. The second was a small, non-randomized, open-label clinical trial, and everybody that got the chloroquine in combination with an antibiotic had significant reductions in their viral loads. So I think there's enough there that it is reasonable to go ahead and conduct a larger trial with a larger sample size, because all 20 of the people who got hydrochloroquine in the French study actually did quite well. So I think Director Fauci was probably referring to the Chinese study where they looked and said, yeah, it shortened the course of pneumonia somewhat and so forth. So bottom line, vaccines, medications, right now, as you commissioners make your decisions on, do we open and close bars, do we open and close schools, do we open and close businesses, you can't be looking in the ahead saying, well, yeah, it's going to be okay. 6 months from now, this is going to be over, and we're going to have the cure for it. It's just not there. I just threw this in as an interesting curiosity. We have a lot of press on coronavirus. Just to remind you that this season, 16,000 people have already died from influenza. So to me, it's interesting that coronavirus, yes, it gets a lot of press, and it's a pandemic, but it's interesting to me we don't hear about the 16,000 people that have died of influenza. But I want to say to all my hearers, this is in to no way diminish the importance of coronavirus. It's just to point out, and to me, it's an interesting aberration of the media. Okay, let's get down to the epidemiology now of what's going on with coronavirus in the United States. So I got this off of from the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. Every week the CDC publishes all this epidemiologic data, and I got the most recent one here from March 16. So they were looking, they were at that time, by March 16, there were 4,226 cases reported in the United States. At that rate, they were looking at 500 more cases a day beginning on the 14th. Among the 508, and I wanted to put this slide up for this reason and to make a point, these numbers here were people who were hospitalized. So they had the disease serious enough that they had to go in the hospital. My point is to notice that 20% of the people who had to be hospitalized were between ages 20 and 44. So it's not only Granny and Grandpa that's in the hospital. 1 out of 5 of the people that were hospitalized, according to CDC, were people between the ages of 20 to 44. So it's a young person's disease too. It's just that they don't die as often from it. And then the last point there, of course, pointing out that in people over 65 years of age, they accounted for 31 of the cases of coronavirus. They accounted for just under half of the hospital admissions, and they accounted for a little over half of the intensive care unit admissions. And of course, 80% of the deaths were in folks in this age group. Mechanical ventilation, and of course, you as county commissioners may be coming up against this if our cases spike and we start struggling with adequacy of medical equipment and supplies. But I think I left something out here. Let me just take a quick. Yes. I didn't put the title up here. Let me go back one here. This is the first report out of Washington, our neighbor. This was reported in JAMA just this last week. And so this is one of the first epidemiologic profiles we have coming out of Washington. But among the critically ill people in Washington, 71% of the 15 patients that the Evergreen Hospital had admitted required mechanical ventilation. 15 of the 15 patients had acute respiratory distress syndrome. That's where the lungs just fill up with food. You take a chest x-ray, the lungs are whited out. And people are struggling to breathe. Their oxygen levels drop to non-sustainable levels for life. And we have to assist them mechanically with a ventilator. 8 of the 15 were in this condition where they were gasping for breath and their lungs were filled with fluid within 72 hours of onset. This figure surprised me that a third of them developed cardiomyopathy. Cardiomyopathy is a condition where the heart becomes dysfunctional, it's weakened, and you don't have your full cardiac output, then you can go into shock, drop your blood pressure, and it's a very serious condition. And they're not sure yet if it's because the virus is directly attacking the heart or if it's secondary to other factors. But we do know that the virus probably has receptors in other places besides the lungs. The fatality rate was 67%. So if you ended up in the ICU in Washington last month, that was your outlook. 2/3 of the people died. And so that's why I say any remark I make, like the influenza, I don't want to in any way diminish how severe and serious this disease is and the serious possibility we face of this overwhelming our population. I'll get to that here a little on. Just very quickly about children. Overall, they're not really highly affected. This is a study out of China published in the New England Journal just this last week. The one study said 1% of the cases were kids. Another one said 12%. But in the U.S. and the CDC, 5% of the cases were kids, kids to young adults, 0 to 19 years of age. Okay, let's get down to the last point here that I want to make and spend the rest of the time emphasizing. I talked about that reproduction number, and that's the mathematical symbol for it. And as I already explained, it's a number of people who become infected with SARS-CoV-2 after they contact or after a contagious person has passed it on to them. And as I explained, right now that number is between 2 to 3. So for each infected person, they're infecting 2 to 3 more people, and that number is probably even higher than that now. So that's probably old data. When R is less than 1 in your population, the infections are starting to decline. When it's 1, it's stable, and of course when it's greater than 1, it's increasing and you're headed for an outbreak or an epidemic. And so we're already there. I mean, I think in our data it's over 2. So this is a significant issue. So what does this imply? The fact that R is 2. Back to high school math, just a quick review. I don't want to get into the weeds on this, but I do want to remind you the difference between linear growth and exponential growth. And so this equation I have up here where it says the math, the rates are increasing at 2 to the nth rate. That is an exponential rate where you take 2, you multiply it by 4, and you get 8, you multiply it by 8 by 2, you get 16, 32, 256. And as you go up, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's huge. And sometimes it's that last number before you get to the final number, maybe only half the people, and then, it explodes. So I put this up here because this is what we are dealing with right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. We're dealing with it in the United States. We're dealing with it worldwide. And here are some of the graphs of the rate of increase in the different world populations. Italy now leads the world, and they have overtaken China, the epicenter of this in the number of deaths. And I'll make a comment about that in a minute. Spain is not too far behind. United States. I want you to look down in the left lower hand corner. What is that curve starting to look like? Does it look linear to you?
It's exponential.
It looks pretty logarithmic, doesn't it? Anyhow, this is what's so serious. In Kootenai County, We started off with 0, we have 3, we have 6, we have 9. But following this math, you can quickly see how by summertime, it's going to be in the hundreds. And indeed, they are forecasting with partial control in place. And I should have brought the New York Times graph they had up there. They're forecasting, and I won't try to put, I forgot the specific number, it's in the hundreds. And it can, if you don't enforce that, and if we get lax in our social distancing and our containment procedures, it can be in the thousands. So and then of course that's Germany right there behind us. But I want you to look at the beginning of that and you can see the bar graphs there, how they're shooting up. And those are the 7-day moving average. They graph the 7-day moving average to smooth it out to show you the general trend on averages. But it's the beginning of a logarithmic and an exponential curve. I want to give you an example of a country that went the other way. And people said South Korea is overreacting. They immediately became very aggressive. And they didn't do it by locking down their country. They immediately started testing thousands of people, and they followed those leads. They put strict containment into place, and look at their curve. That's what we want to do before it starts getting out of control and starts multiplying at a rate that we couldn't even begin to ever catch up on. Look once again at Italy. If the United States, the only treatment we have at this point, we don't have vaccines, we don't have drugs, all we have are the containment measures that we can take, and we have to decide how far we want to go with that, how hard we're going to, enforce it. And unfortunately, most of the time, Italy didn't get real strict about it until it was completely out of control and the horse was out of the barn. They'll never catch up. They're going to follow a curve I'm going to show you later on. Well, it'll naturally go down, but not for a good reason. Any questions on this? This is extremely important to think about and remember these graphs and the math and the 2 times the whatever power. I'm talking to you as you make decisions that when right now we already have cases in our county, we know they're here, there's probably a lot more than we know because we're not testing. And people say, well, look, this country has, Africa doesn't have hardly, I called my friend who has his doctoral degree in public health in Southern California, he worked for Riverside County. I said, Mansour, how many cases of COVD do you have in San Bernardino County? We don't know if we have any, maybe less than 5. I said, you got to be kidding. Southern California has the 3rd highest rate of COVID-19. He says, yeah, well, guess what? San Bernardino is bankrupt, they're not testing or anything. So when you look at these numbers, you have to realize that some of them are artificially low because they're not being tested. And we're back to that formula I gave you with the question marks on it. We don't know how many people are infected out there. So we have 6, or what is it this morning? I haven't seen it. 9 people in the county? If we already know there's 9, we know there are plenty more out there because each of those people, could have hit 2 more. Those 2 people then went to 4. I mean, that's the way this works. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Dr. Mills, we're coming up at the noon hour. We've allocated 1 hour for the meeting. So I guess what I would ask you, and I really hate to cut you short because this is compelling and fascinating at the same time, what recommendations are you prepared to make for us? Not that we can necessarily take any action, but what is your thought? What are your thoughts at this point?
My thoughts are that you have already done some very important things, and I commend the mayors of the cities who have closed the bars and the restaurants. My question is that across all 3 cities? Do we have a uniform plan now to close the places where people congregate, where they're close together, and where the infection we already have in our county is going to keep multiplying?
Pat, I saw you nodding. This is Pat Braden, Civil Deputy Prosecuting Attorney.
Portland and Post Falls originally did, and then Hayden and Rathdrum followed suit after that. So those are our 4 largest cities in the county.
Pat,
The county itself has not, the unincorporated
Yeah, and I guess it's questionable as to whether we as county commissioners even have the authority. Do we?
We're still researching.
Were you researching that? Okay. For the folks who are tuning in from OEM, KCSO, Panhandle Health, do you have any questions for Dr. Mills? Go right ahead. Any questions?
I guess, Chris, I have a question for law enforcement. When we have folks that come in who should be tested and don't want to be tested, what process is going to be in place if they want to say adios and walk out the door, and you know you might be sending someone out there to infect 20 more people?
Panhandle, are you on? Yeah. They would be the ones probably that would have to answer that. It's a valid question. Anyone there? Any questions for Dr. Mills? Any answers? I don't know.
This is the only thing we have.
Yeah, go right ahead, please. Identify yourself.
I have a question for law enforcement.
Go right ahead.
Feedback on.
Process is going to be in place. If they want to say adios and walk out the door, and
That's you, that's you. It's playing it back. Is there anyone online from law enforcement?
Hello, this is Laura Whalen.
Yeah, go right ahead, Laura. Floor's yours.
they would be the ones probably that would have to answer that. Is that anyone there? Any questions for Dr. Mills? Any answers?
And I'm sorry that your question.
I don't know. This is the only thing we have. Yeah, go right ahead, please. Identify yourself.
Everybody needs to mute their computers so Laura Whalen can ask her question.
Go ahead, Laura.
I'm sorry, I lost through all the echo and whatnot. Was there a question for me?
I thought you wanted to ask a question.
Well, the question for her is, what do we do if somebody refuses?
Oh, okay. So the question for you is, how do we handle a situation where someone might be symptomatic,
The
but...
problem right now, sir, is the amount of PPE and the amount of test kits, if you will, or nasal NP swabs that we have. Because our testing site, we have two Kootenai Health set up, and as you're well aware, they set up the 2207 for drive-through testing, and as well as the tent to prevent people that might be infectious from going into the ER for those that were more critically ill. Currently, there's no one hospitalized for COVID-19 at Kootenai Health. And our numbers are 6 as of right now, and certainly we're always waiting for additional test results. The results seem to take 5 to 7 days is what the trend we're seeing. So the limit on the testing right now is to just folks that are symptomatic, and Kootenai Health has put that into effect to preserve the test kits and the PPE. The guidance is a little bit different than that. Certainly if there's a symptomatic healthcare worker or first responder, or an exposed, rather, that's not symptomatic, we would like to see them tested. But right now, it's purely supplies. We're waiting. The SNS, 25% of the SNS has been received down at the state level. I understand they ordered an additional 25%. They set up a process for pushing that out, we are trying to work through that process with them. I've been on multiple phone calls and emphasized our need up here. So, and of course, we'll keep you informed when that is being pushed up here.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
So, yeah, Chris,
Yes, we heard you fine. We heard you fine. Thank you. Dr. Mills?
at this point, the only answer to your question is how much further we would need to go in our containment procedures and how much we would enforce that. how many more businesses we would close down besides bars and restaurants and so forth. So it's a matter of how many more businesses you're going to close down and how much you're going to force it.
Yeah, and I think
That's what we have at this point. is
that's all we have
containment.
at this point. That's right. And as Pat Braden pointed out, the mayors have already taken action. As to whether or not we as county commissioners could take action, our attorney is researching that from a legal perspective. I don't know that we necessarily have the same authority, but then again, we don't have the establishments really within the unincorporated areas. Most of those establishments are in the cities.
Yes.
So I think they're, to your point, probably taking the measures they can take to hit I shouldn't say to hit, but to contain the majority of those establishments that would have crowds.
Thank you. And in closing, I would just like to appeal to,
Oh, hang on.
Go right ahead, Bill. Go ahead, Bill.
I would like to know from legal how long they anticipate until they can provide us a definitive answer on what authority the Board of Commissioners may or may not have.
Pat, do you want to answer that? How long would it take for you to determine what authority we have or don't?
Well, I know Jamila Holmes is working.
She's looking on it.
Right now, and I would guess by the end of the day today.
Yeah. Bill, probably by the end of the day, if not tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah,
I also wanted to thank Dr. Mills for an absolutely excellent presentation.
Did you hear that, Dr. Mills?
thank you.
So I guess, are there any further questions for Dr. Mills? Jennifer from the Court of...
Yes.
I read a CDC press release for
We'll be right back to you.
California that not just our people with lung or heart disease or those who are immunocompromised are susceptible to increased risk of some areas actually, but also people who are pregnant, who have been pregnant in the past 2 weeks, or people who have neurological and developmental delays.
Yes.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, Dr. Mills, could you just briefly restate Jennifer's question? 'Cause
She's asking about, here, I'll let her do it so everyone can hear.
I read in a press release from the CDC in Santa Clara County in California that not just people with heart and lung disease or compromised immune systems, they're not at greater risk of serious infection from COVID-19, but also people who are pregnant or who have been pregnant in the past 2 weeks, or people who have neurological or developmental delays. Can you speak to?
Yes, and all this kind of relates back to the immune system, because your immune system changes during pregnancy, it changes with chronic degenerative diseases, and you're correct, it's just not heart disease and diabetes. You hear about that because those are the most common ones in our society. We have 30 million diabetics and, heart disease, 2/3 of the American population are hypertensive and so forth, but any chronic disease that's going to impact the immune system in any way is going to put them at increased risk. So it's a false idea to think that only, well, I don't have diabetes and my blood pressure's okay, I'm fine. No, it's, if you have to look at the condition that you're talking about and see how that impacts the immune system. And a lot of the chronic degenerative diseases do that, Alzheimer's and all the others.
Okay, there was someone, I guess, joining us by phone who had a question for Dr. Mills?
Well, this is more of just a statement here, based on the conversation and the suggestion by the doctor. My name is Scott Howard, and as I pointed out to the mayor and city council of Post Falls, limiting what people can do on their private property and limiting the right to assemble is actually a violation of the state constitution, and therefore the laws and ordinances passed by the city councils and the mayors are unconstitutional and are invalid according to the severance or severability clause. And going further, adding the force majeure clause in there basically said they are not accountable for their decision to close private businesses, which is cowardice at best. But I would advise that the Board of County Commissioners, if you find that you might have some remote possibility of passing an ordinance similar to this in the county, that you'd be advised as well that it is unconstitutional by the state constitution, as well as the federal constitution, and I would advise against such guidance.
Mr. Howard, what remedy would you suggest then?
Well, if you want businesses to close and you want people to stay at home, incentivize it. You don't force them to do it. You have to give them a reason to do it beyond their own. Right now, they're going to lose money. They're going to lose employees. So by providing some kind of benefit to them that can help them get through this time period, that would be okay. But to tell them they just can't operate and they have to deal with it, that's wrong.
Chris, can I put one more slide up to
Thank
answer
you,
that
sir.
question?
Yeah, go right ahead, Dr. Mills.
I just quickly want to put a slide up here, and I apologize for going over time here. But I want to point out here that if we do nothing, and my laser, I guess, isn't working here, this is the curve we're looking at. We're looking at a very high peak, and this is the availability and the capacity of our healthcare system to deal with this pandemic. And this isn't panic talk. This is happening right now in Italy. And so it's not theoretical. They don't have the medical resources to take care of the hundreds of people coming in. 800 people are dying a day. And so once you cross this line here, you're talking about we're coming to a point where we have to consider medical care rationing. And there's no doctor that wants to get into that and decide who lives and who doesn't because they're being so overwhelmed. So and to the last gentleman's question, I would simply point to this. It's actually happening in another country right now that didn't do anything. Instead, we may have the same number of people if we take the proper measures, and we may have the people total overall, but the curve is low enough that the medical and the healthcare system can manage it. That's the idea of, quotes, flattening the curve.
I'm sorry, who's
I
this?
would address your concern there. This is Scott Howard again. The current data here taken from the World Health Organization daily situation reports have been charted and have been mapped, and the U.S. Rate of active cases, confirmed cases, is actually exceeding the global rate, even with the quarantines and the social distancing measures we've put in place. Currently, the rate of new cases is exceeding that of the global community, whereas the death rate in the United States is currently now at 1.3% versus the almost 5% of the global community. So we are doing substantial in keeping our death rate lower, but the actual curve is much sharper and much steeper going up in the United States than it is in the rest of the world. So I understand where you're coming from with that, but forcing people to abide by what you think or by panic, that is wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Howard, appreciate it. Do we have any other questions for Dr. Mills? Okay, then. Yeah, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Okay, Sandy Von Baron. I would like to know if the doctor.
Sandy, you're breaking up. We better move on. Okay, so are there any other questions for Dr. Mills? If I get the question, Dr. Mills, I'll forward it to you. I can get Sandy's question afterwards. Dwayne, yes, sir.
How important is that we get daily updates? This is Dwayne Rasmussen. I believe Panhandle Health has decided to do weekly, or maybe that's the governor's office. How important are daily updates versus weekly or monthly?
Actually, we get daily updates. Basically, the Emergency Operations Center is publishing the update every day shortly after 4 p.m., where the day statistics come out regarding any potential infections. So we do receive them on a daily basis. Yep.
You do, but is that public receiving them?
Yes, it's a press release. Leslie, go right ahead, please.
Oh, yeah, that's it. There, by 4:15 every day, our EOC puts out a public release.
The governor's office said that they were just going to do it on Friday at 5 p.m. for certain data.
Yeah, well, Panhandle Health, along with our Emergency Operations
We're
Center,
doing
does
it
it
daily.
daily.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chris, I just had one last slide to
Yeah, go
finish
right ahead,
on
Duncan.
this. This is the decision flow chart then that our government is faced with. Our county government, our national government, we have no incidence or prevalence data on which to make at this time. And I already pointed out that that is an extremely important number in the numerator where we're looking at how serious the disease is. We're dealing with a disease that's highly pathogenic, that is, it's highly infective. It has a high mortality rate for the older population. There's no specific treatment to look for an end in sight, and it's exponentially increasing. So this is what the decision you're faced with when you say, okay, it's getting worse, what do we do? You're stuck with either do nothing or take the most aggressive tracking and containment procedures that are available to you.
So Dr. Mills, specifically with regard to Kootenai County, is it your belief that the infection rate is higher than indicated?
Yes, I believe that there are infections out there that we don't even know about just by the fact that it's starting to creep up every day. And this is the pattern with exponential. It starts off with a very low number, it's flat for a period of time, and then it suddenly shoots up, like you saw in the graphs there.
Okay. Okay, at this point, I think it's time we about wrap it up. We've had public comment, so I don't need to call for it formally. What I would ask, however, of my co-commissioners, Leslie Duncan, Bill Brooks, is that with regard to those organizations that report directly to us, there are approximately 15, that our department heads respect the wishes of individuals who choose to work from home and make every effort to accommodate those people. If somebody's feeling insecure about coming to work or is perhaps not feeling up to par physically, I think we need to respect that and do everything we can to accommodate them. Leslie?
Yeah, that's already been communicated with our management team countywide, and our public information, our public communications manager here at the county will be putting something out again this afternoon.
Bill, you okay?
Yep, everything sounds good. That would be my recommendation also.
Okay. So once again, thank you, everyone. A special thanks to Dr. Mills. We truly appreciate it, sir, taking your time and assembling the presentation, the material. The time is now 12:15, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for attending again. Appreciate it.